Hello and welcome to the 27th of December, and because it's John the Evangelist that's celebrated today, but there's no Christmas carol for St. John the Evangelist, I thought I would do the Angel Gabriel, O Come Emmanuel, and the Boar's Head Carol. And tomorrow I would do O Tannenbaum, Christmas Tree, Holly and the Ivy, I Saw Three Ships, and of course Personent Hodie. So I read the introduction yesterday. Tonight we will do, today we will do the first carol, which comes under the subject, the Annunciation. And of course it's the Angel Gabriel. And what I'm going to do slightly different, I'm going to read the carol first and then its musical history. The Angel Gabriel from heaven came. His wings as drifted snow, his eyes as flame. All hail, said he, thou lowly maiden Mary, most highly favoured lady, Gloria. For known a blessed mother thou shalt be, all generations laud and honour thee. Thy son shall be Emmanuel, by seers foretold, most highly favoured lady, Gloria. Then gentle Mary meekly bowed her head. To me be as it pleaseth God, she said. My soul shall laud and magnify his holy name, most highly favoured lady, Gloria. Of her, Emmanuel the Christ was born, in Bethlehem, all on a Christmas morn, and Christian folk throughout the world will ever say, most highly favoured lady, Gloria. We start on a hillside, not in Judea, but in Spain, watching an angel with wings as drifted snow. That gorgeous image tells us a lot about our Christmas carol tradition. It's not in the Bible. It's not even in the original carol. It was written by a Victorian clergyman standing, not sitting, at his desk in his vicarage in Devon. That's how these things can come down to us, as surprising and as beautiful as the angel itself. The Angel Gabriel is a folk carol from the Basque country. It was collected by the composer Charles Boar and published in the series Archive de la Tradition Basque in 1895. Boards represents an important type of musician in this story, inquiring, creative, historically and culturally aware. He instituted the performance of Italian Renaissance music at his Grand Society Church in Paris, pioneered the rediscovery and performance of plain song, and founded the Schola Cantorum to promote his ideas. At the same time, he was fascinated by the folk culture of the regions of his native France. So Charles Board, something like that. Collecting traditional texts and melodies before the rapid changes of the new century swept them away. It is a story repeated all over Europe. His equivalents in England were the ragged band of skilled musicians and folklorists led by Ralph Vaughan Williams and Cecil Sharp, and a group of clergymen who wanted to raid and preserve the inheritance of their Catholic forebears as much as the earthier devotions of their parish, in order to bring the best and most beautiful music from across Europe and beyond into their newly confident church. These men were the warrior priests on the cultural and liturgical front line, Many were of strong and decided character, none more so than Sabin Baring-Gould. Baring-Gould spent much of his childhood travelling in Europe, partly because of a recurring bronchial complaint, which did not prevent him growing up to father 15 children and live to the age of nearly 90. As a young curate in York, he fell in love with a 14-year-old mill girl called Grace Taylor. That would be frowned upon these days. Who was sent to learn middle-class manners in the home of a local family until she was old enough to marry. A similar marital arrangement was used by E.W. Benson, later Archbishop of Canterbury and inventor of the carol service, with colourful results. Grace and Sabin were married for 48 years, and when she died, he inscribed the words Dimidium animae mei, half my soul, on her tomb. All but one of their children survived to adulthood, as it was in them days. In 1872, Baring-Gould's father died, and he inherited the 3,000-acre family estate of Lew Trenchard in Devon. The living of the local parish church was naturally in the gift of the squire, and when it fell vacant in 1881, he appointed himself. The transition to landed squire parson was complete, and he dedicated the rest of his long life to the people and buildings of his parish and to the voracious pursuit of his own all-encompassing interests. Educated Victorians believed they could do anything. Professional specialisation is a later invention. This was an era when a headmaster could pupate into a bishop, and vice versa. When a gardener like Joseph Paxton could set out to construct a glasshouse for a newly discovered giant lily and end up as a pioneer in artist engineering glass and iron. When Brunel, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, could design anything he liked. When men like Charles Darwin and Aldous Huxley were draftsmen and prose stylists, as well as scientists and adventurers. Baring-Gould was interested in everything. When his church and manor house needed rebuilding, he acted as his own architect. Sorry about this. Just updating my phone. He travelled, he studied, he investigated, above all, he wrote novels, libretti, books about saints, stone circles, werewolves and ghosts. He wrote hymns, including that stirring taut song of muscular Christianity, Onward Christian Soldiers, later set to a tune by, of course, Sir Arthur Sullivan. Who else? Baring-Gould's literary output is estimated at over 1,250 titles, an astonishing number which, even assuming a rather unlikely active writing career of 60 years, works out at one every 2 to 3 weeks. Naturally, he did things his own way. He had a desk specially made, which enabled him to write standing up, which he did to the very end of his life. He was, by any standards, a fine writer. Modern scholarship may perhaps question if such rapidity allowed for the most detailed primary research. Serious theology may wonder at his cheerfully egalitarian approach to the lives and influence of saints of the Church. The hounds of Dartmoor and the coves of ancient kings under their tors and tumuli. But his use of language, his range of reference and his sheer enthusiasm more than make up for any such deficiencies. Like those great Reformation stylists of the English language, from whom he clearly learnt so much, he was a communicator. On one of his youthful peregrinations, Baring-Gould spent a winter in and around the Basque region, and later wrote about the area in A Book of the Pyrenees. All his voluminous inclusivity is here, snapping up every trifle of history and prehistory, the Romans, Bonaparte, wildflowers, geology, language, architecture and costume, constantly cross-referencing them with his observations and readings about other parts of Europe. Fascinatingly, he regarded the Basques as part of a family of Celtic peoples of which he, a native of Devon, was also a part. the last shrunken remains of that Iberian race that once occupied all Western Europe from Scotland to Portugal and Spain. He is not always particularly polite about the Basque. He compares the language to Gaelic, Welsh, French, Latin, and even Chinese, and concludes that his own language, as represented by the Basque of the present day, is crude, unformed, and wanting in flexibility. He states that the Basque has not distinguished himself in literature, dismissing a set of ancient poems as forgeries. He even, in a strikingly modern passage, ticks them off roundly for the deforestation of their mountain slopes, pointing out that such environmental degradation is quick to achieve but slow to repair, and quoting the Sermon on the Mount in support of his argument, which the modern environmentalists would probably do well to avoid. By his own estimation, one of his most important achievements was the collection of folk songs of Devon and Cornwall, which he made in collaboration with a number of musical colleagues, including Cecil Sharp, and published in a series of books including Songs and Ballads of the West, A Garland of Country Song, and English Folk Songs for Schools. This last volume remained in regular use for much of the 20th century. As a good clergyman, Baron Gould found it necessary to tone down some of the ruder words. For example, the song Maids at 18, where he blushingly dilutes the young lady's enthusiasm for certain aspects of the married estate, commenting, "However droll the words may be in the original, no girl would want to sing them today." As a good scholar, however, he carefully preserved his original field notes, allowing later, less prudish generations to restore the song to its earthy glory. His enthusiasms for Celtic culture and folk song come together in this beautiful carol. His text is as much a paraphrase as a direct translation, freely borrowing appropriate imagery from familiar English versions of the Magnificat and Ave Maria, as well as the medieval hymn Angelus ad Virginem, on which the folk song is based. Baron Gould condenses the 6 verses of the Basque original into 4, creating a touching dialogue between angel and virgin, and moving from the Annunciation to its fulfilment at the Nativity in the last verse, all framed by a devoted little refrain with a clear echo of 15th century English macaronic carols to the Virgin, most highly favoured Lady Gloria. He also indulges the curious habit, shared with many of his clerical colleagues, of inverting syntax in rather odd ways, something he would certainly not have allowed himself to do elsewhere in his admirably clear written output, "For known a blessed mother thou shalt be." It's an odd quirk. They all did it, particularly the king of the carol writers, J.M. Neal, John Mason Neal. Some later writers and musicians hated it and soundly criticised them for it, but it has become very much part of how we do carols. Putting the words in an unusual order gives the text a kind of instant old-world feel which seems appropriate somehow. Attempts to change them back have usually failed. Perhaps our hymn writers, classical scholars, all were attempting at some level to impose the structures and virtues of Latin onto the vernacular, as grammarians have repeatedly tried to do to written English. Like so many folk carols, the tune features a haunting minor-flavoured mode and a liltingly irregular rhythm which refuses to go into a time signature. The first 2 phrases each have 7 beats, the last 2 have 8, all in a gentle triple time, which betrays its origins in something probably rather more rustic and dance-like. The themes of our Christmas story are laid before us here. Its genesis reveals to us many of the themes of the story of our carol tradition. Like the angel, this little carol promises much. And our second one, O Come Emmanuel, or known in Latin as Veni Veni Emmanuel. Again, I'll do the hymn first. O come Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou rod of Jesse, free thine own from Satan's tyranny. From depths of hell thy people save, and give them victory o'er the grave. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou key of David, come, and open wide our heavenly home. Make safe the way that leads on high, and close the path to misery. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou Lord of might, who to thy tribes on Sinai's height in ancient times didst give the law, in cloud and majesty and awe. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. And O come, Emmanuel is Advent. There's plenty of other carols I could have quoted, but this one is the choice. Some of our carols have become associated with celebrations of the birth of Jesus almost by accident. This one is bound into the liturgy and theology of Western Christianity since its earliest incarnations. Its genesis lies in the 7 O's, the great Advent antiphons. These are a series of prayers, each invoking Christ by one of the names or titles he is given in Scripture, ending with a supplication framed around that image. They are unimaginably ancient. Boethius, the Roman author of the Consolation of Philosophy, whose writings about music gave medieval university students such grief, may show some familiarity with their language as far back as the early 6th century. The Anglo-Saxon poet Cynewulf wrote the Christ in about 750 to 800. Its first part, Advent, movingly intersperses the gospel narrative of Mary and Joseph with a series of reflections that clearly echo the language and imagery of the great O's. And the edition and translation here is Sir Israel Gallant's, published in London in 1892. And I couldn't tell you what the original language is, but the translation is, O thou ruler and thou righteous king, thou keeper of the keys that open life, bless us with victory with a bright career, denied unto another if his work is worthless. The poem continues with another blast of language I couldn't tell you, but in English, Hail heavenly beam, brightest of angels thou, sent unto men upon this middle earth. Sounds like something from Lord of the Rings. Thou art the true refulgence of the sun, radiant above the stars, and from thyself illuminest for ever all the tides of time. O thou God of spirits, how wisely thou wast named with name aright, Emmanuel, as the angels spake the word in Hebrew first, which in its secret meaning fully now is thus interpreted, the guardian of the skies, God's self is now with us. In passing, it was this edition, not surprisingly, that provided J.R.R. Tolkien with much of his imagery and several of his names, including Earendel and Middle-earth. Later in the first millennium, those great crucibles of liturgical music, the powerhouse Benedictine monasteries of northern France employed the abbot as cantor for the first of the O's, with each subsequent antiphon being intoned on successive days by the next most senior member of the establishment in descending order of importance. An interesting inverted pre-echo of the modern habit of having the 9 lessons read in the opposite order of noteworthiness. The first by a nervous 8-year-old chorister trying to pretend he knows what a cicatrice is, Cicatrice, then a student right up to the local worthy. Theologically, each antiphon links a prophecy of Isaiah through to its fulfillment in the Gospel, echoing with the resonances of the particular words and ideas through the Bible and beyond. Liturgically, the 7 antiphons are sung before and after the Magnificat at Vespers on the last 7 days of Advent, 17th to the 23rd of December. Yes. Remarkably, they survived and prospered into the Anglican and other Protestant traditions, though with some variation of the exact dates on which each is sung. As with the Gospels themselves, early Christian writers discovered or created several more to go with the original set. The basic set of 7 each begin with the letter O, followed by the name or title being invoked: Sapientia, Adonai, Radix Yesi, Clavis David, Oriens, Rex Gentium, Emmanuel. Somebody noticed that the initial letters of these keywords, if read in reverse order, spell the Latin phrase ero cras, and claimed that this meant tomorrow I will come, in reference to the meaning of the season for Advent. Ingenious, but unlikely. For one thing, the phrase more accurately means tomorrow I will be, which is at best rather vague. For another, this sort of wordplay is not readily found in liturgical materials. Also, if it's a kind of hidden coded prophecy building up to something, it spoils the point somewhat to do it backwards. More likely some clever monk in the Middle Ages, an era which thoroughly enjoyed its acrostics, word games and number patterns, noticed the coincidence one board day at Vespers and set that particular hare running. The theological exegesis of the antiphons has occupied the minds of many brainy people. Perhaps we may allow ourselves one tentative toe in these learned waters to get some small idea of where the words and ideas of this carol come from. The first antiphon begins O sapientia, quae ex ore altissimi prodeisti, veni ad docendum nos viam prudentiae. O wisdom proceeding from the mouth of the highest, come and teach us the way of understanding. Isaiah says the Spirit of Lord shall rest upon him, the spirit of wisdom and understanding. The wisdom of Solomon has wisdom reacheth from one end to another mightily, and sweetly doth she order all things. Joshua was full of the spirit of wisdom. The child Jesus grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. St. Paul asks that the Father of glory may give unto you the spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him. The words are pregnant with the promise of fulfillment, like Advent itself. This is the promise the antiphons and their successor, the carol, seek to invoke. The Advent antiphons are prose, with their own plain song melody, and are still often sung by accomplished choirs. At some point, they were versified into a regular metre and picked up a repeating refrain. The final stage was to marry them to an existing plain song tune, originally intended for quite different words. A familiar classic emerges from the amalgamation of ancient, disparate elements. Here is the Latin prose of the fourth antiphon. O clavis David, et sceptrum domus Israel, qui aperis et nemo claudit, claudis et nemo aperit, veni et educ vinctum de domo carceris, sedentem in tenebris et umbra mortis. O key of David and sceptre of the house of Israel, who opens and no man shuts, who shuts and no man opens, come and lead from the prison house the captive who sits in darkness and in the shadow of death. And this is the metrical version with its new refrain. Veni clavis Davidica, regna reclude caelica, fac iter tutum superum, et claude vias inferum, gaude, gaude, Emmanuel nascetur proter Israel. The process by which the various versions merge and emerge is of course thoroughly hidden in the tenebris and the umbra. Finding a way through introduces us to the work of unquestionably the two most important among the many Victorian clergymen in this story, John Mason Neale and Thomas Helmore. Neale published the metrical Latin version beginning Veni Veni Emmanuel in 1851. He believed that it was written in the 12th century, with the refrain being added at an unknown later date. This is entirely credible on stylistic grounds, though the earliest source known to Neale, and indeed since, is a Tridentine Catholic Psalter from Cologne, dating from 1710. He set another historical puzzle with his choice of tune, harmonised by Helmore. Neale told his readers it was adapted from a French missal. The secret of exactly what that meant was to wait another 100 years for its own advent out of darkness. Translators and hymnologists soon started scurrying all over this hymn, with its stirring evocation of the themes of Advent and its unusual but memorable melody. One of the very first English versions of the original antiphons was written fittingly by none other than the captain of the Catholics himself, Blessed St. John Henry Newman, in 1836. Editors and compilers followed with multiple translations of the hymn, using the same metre as the Latin so their words could be sung to the same tune. These versions went forth and multiplied so enthusiastically that the strands of their individual verbal DNA have got completely muddled up and become totally indistinguishable, like fruit flies in a bell jar. Writers borrow words and phrases from each other, with and without acknowledgement. Some hymn books ascribe their version to Neale, ignoring or not noticing the fact that they have altered his very first line from draw nigh, Emmanuel to O Come Emmanuel. Most give multiple attributions to Neale and Lacy, or the 12th century, or Cologne, or Anon, or unknown, or some combination of all these, usually adding the dreaded words and editors and compilers. Some think Adonai rhymes with majesty, others with earth and sky. How do you pronounce that word? Who knows? Modern choirs don't. And what is a day spring? And is it Emmanuel with an E or Emmanuel with an I, which are at least pronounced the same? It's probably impossible to know now exactly who first wrote what. Verses mysteriously change their order like the French in a bus queue. Some assaults on the Latin, or bits of it, were committed by person or persons unknown. Enough perhaps for our purposes to note that important contributions were made by, among many others, Neale, T.A. Lacy, and Henry Sloane Coffin. The version given at the end of this chapter, which I just read earlier, is Neale's, as adapted by Coffin and used in hymns ancient and modern. One other version merits attention. In the 1850s, Neale and Helmore published their hymnal Noted. This is number 65. And that is a copy of it, Come Emmanuel, draw nigh, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice. Emmanuel shall be born for thee, O Israel. Draw nigh, O Jesse's rod, draw nigh, to free us from the enemy, from hell's infernal pit to save, and give us victory o'er the grave. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall be born for thee, O Israel. Draw nigh, thou Orient, who shalt cheer and comfort by thine advent here. and banish far the brooding gloom of sinful night and endless doom. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall be born for thee, O Israel. Draw nigh, O David's key, the heavenly gate will ope to thee. Make safe the way that leads on high, and close the path to misery. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall be born for thee, O Israel. Draw nigh, O Lord of might, who to thy tribes from Sinai's height in ancient time didst give the law in cloud and majesty and awe. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall be born for thee, Israel, O Israel. The interesting point here is the proper plain song notation. 4-line stave, old-style clef, rhythmless neumes, instead of crotchets and quavers, no bar lines, with English words. This is exactly what John Marbeck attempted at the Reformation. Respect the integrity of the old musical ways as much as possible, but give the people the words in their own language. The title of their hymn book may well contain an echo of Marbeck's famous publication, The Book of Common Prayer, noted of 1550. As scholars, Neale and Helmore were ahead of their time. Other editors, of course, forced the tune into the straitjacket of a regular rhythmic pulse. It doesn't work. The tune won't go into 4/4. And arrangers have to keep chopping and changing their choice of time signature. All very confusing. And what of the tune itself? Where did Neale get it from? The hymnal noted places the elusive French missile, perhaps unexpectedly, in Lisbon. Neale spent the winter of 1853-4 in Madeira, recuperating from a lung complaint brought on by living in Crawley. A serious coincidence with the medical history of Reverend Sabin Baron Gold. He may have found his source on that trip. Others claim that it was Bishop Jenner who found the Lisbon book. Whatever the truth, the source text of Helmore's tune could not be found. Some even hinted that Helmore wrote the tune himself. To get at the truth, we find ourselves in the excellent company of the eminent Cambridge-based plainsong scholar and nun, Mother Thomas More, a.k.a. Dr. Mary Berry. In 1966, Dr. Berry was on a research visit to France. My attention had been drawn to a small 15th century processional in the Paris Bibliothèque Nationale. It was Franciscan in origin and probably intended for the use of nuns rather than friars. Turning the pages, I discovered on folio 89 VFF a number of troped verses for the funeral responsory Libera Me in the form of a litany beginning with the words Bone Iesu Dulcis Cunctis. The melody of these tropes was none other than the tune of O Come Emmanuel. It appeared in square notation on the left-hand page, and on the opposite page there was a second part that fitted exactly like a mirror image, in note-against-note harmony with the hymn tune. The book would thus have been shared by two sisters, each singing her own part as they possessed. So it would seem that this great Advent hymn tune was not, in the first instance, associated with Advent at all, but with a funeral litany. Perhaps it is a measure of Helmore's genius that he detected in this melody an appropriate Advent sound as well, one which conveys an unmistakable sense of solemn expectancy, not only for the nativity of Christ, but also for his second coming. Helmore was shrewd enough also to have been aware that an indubitable link exists between the theology of Advent and a procession marking the passage from death to eternal life. It is just possible that Dr. Berry was looking at the same book wheezily pored over by Neale. More likely, another copy of the same chant made its way across Europe, perhaps within the Franciscan community, and ended up in Lisbon. Either way, we have our tune. We have, too, probably our most ancient carol. Next time you use it to invoke the great promise of Advent, you are doing so in phrases and cadences that may not have sounded entirely unfamiliar to the earliest Christian musicians of all. And the third one begins the feasting and making ready section, and it's the Boar's Head Carol. I don't think I've ever heard of it. The boar's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary, and I pray you, masters, be merry. Quod estis in convivio, caput apri defero, redens laudes domino. The boar's head, as I understand, is the rarest dish in all this land, which thus bedecked with a gay garland, let us servire cantico, caput apri defero, redens laudes domino. Our steward hath provided this in honour of the King of Bliss, which on this day to be served is in regenensi atrio, caput apri defero, redens laudes domino. Writing in 1861, the pseudonymous carol collector and historian Joshua Sylvester divided traditional carols under 6 headings: legendary or narrative, religious, often by real poets like Sappho, numeral carols, songs of the holly and ivy, boar's head carols, and festive peaches such as wassails and drinking songs. It is a sensible and useful list, though when dealing with something so fluid and amorphous, there is a good deal of overspill between and beyond his categories, and indeed with others, for example, church anthems and school songs. The fact that Boar's Head carols get a category to themselves testifies to their importance. The Boar's Head feast, with its music, runs through accounts of large-scale Christmas festivities from the earliest days. The humble turkey did not always have reason to feel nervous at Christmas. Midwinter feasting, naturally enough, has always helped stave off the long British winter. Bones found at Stonehenge and elsewhere suggest large gatherings munching on pig and other delicacies. Later, romantically minded scholar poets tried hard to link the Boar's Head festivals with various religious practices of the Vikings. One of the first much quoted accounts is of the occasion in June 1170, when Henry II appointed his young son to rule jointly with him. Holinshead, writing much later, of course, says, King Henry the father served his son at the table as sewer, bringing up the boar's head with trumpets before him, according to the manner, implying a well-established ceremonial to go with the entry of the dish, complete with music. And that was the boar's head ceremony in 19th century Oxford. Plantagenet and Tudor monarchs had the happy habit of giving members of their household a dinner as a reward for loyal service. The adult singers of the Chapel Royal, for example, were treated to an annual feast requiring 1 or sometimes 2 animals to be specially hunted in the royal parks at Hampton Court or the New Forest, though these were usually deer rather than boar. Walter Scott, writing in 1808, has this account of a feast around the time of the Battle of Flodden in 1513. The fire, with well-dried logs supplied, went roaring up the chimney wide. Then was brought in the lusty brawn by old blue-coated serving man. Then the grim boar's head frowned on high, crested with bays and rosemary. Then came the merry maskers in, and carols roared with blithesome din. If unmelodious was the song, it was a hearty note and strong. Romanticised, certainly, but again showing the well-established details, musical and culinary, of the ceremony. The carol itself first pokes its hairy tusks out of the undergrowth in 1521. Wynkyn de Worde was a printer associate of Caxton, first literary coloniser of Fleet Street and St Paul's Churchyard. and skilled entrepreneur, servicing the newly expanding popular appetite for religious tracts, psalters, school grammars, Canterbury Tales, and books about love, saints, and Robin Hood. In 1521, he published a short volume of Christmas carols. Just one page of one copy survives, preserved in Oxford by an 18th century antiquarian. It's the last page of the book, with two carols, one on each side. This is one of them. There we go. Caput apri differo, redens laudes domino. The boar's head in hand bring I with garlands gay in rosemary. I pray you all sing merely, qui estis in convivio. The boar's head, I understand, is the vis serois in this land. I don't know what that means. Look, where'er it be sand, servite cum cantico. Be glad, lords, both more and lass, for this hath ordained our steward, to cheer you all this Christmas, the boar's head with mustard. Thus endeth the Christmas carols. No music is printed. The technology to do this economically is still a few decades away. Immediately, however, a complication arises. There is another source, also from the early 16th century, and also preserved in Oxford from a commonplace book owned by Richard Hill. Here it is. On the right there. On the left, sorry, as you would be looking at it. Tudor handwriting, cramped and crabby, takes a bit of getting used to, but this is what it says. Caput apri refero, resonens laudes domino. The boar's head in horndis I bring, with garlandis gay and birdie sing. I pray you all help me to sing, qui estis in convivio. The boar's head, I understand, is chief service in all this land, wheresoever it may be found, seruiter cum synapio. The boar's head, I dare well say, anon after the, I don't know what that word, 6th day, he taketh his leave and goth away, exuit tunc de patria. It's clearly the same poem, but in a different version. The first two verses are similar in content and metre, although Winken prints these instead of cheese, apparently a typo. But the sources diverge markedly in verse 3, or it looks like cheese. Hill's version preserves the rhyme and metre of the first two verses, while Winkin's does something quite different. Be glad, lords, both more and lass, for this hath ordained our steward, to cheer you all this Christmas, the boar's head with mustard. Hill's version could be sung to the same tune throughout. Winkin's needs something different for verse 3. Perhaps there is a hint here of the shape of the accompanying musical ceremonial. From here on there are many accounts of the boar's head feast and its carol. Details differ, but the basic elements remain the same. The head is brought in on a dish, garlanded with silks, herbs and mustard, sometimes as the first dish of a gargantuan banquet. The words of the carol change considerably between versions, but there are always 3 verses sung by a soloist leading a procession through the hall, stopping at 3 stations for the choir or the entire hall to sing the chorus. Sometimes there are trumpets or other minstrels in the procession or up in a gallery. Here's one typical account of a visit to Oxford by Henry, Prince of Wales, at Christmas 1607. The first mess was a boar's head, which carried by ye tallest and lustiest of all the guard. Next to him 2 pages in taffetai sarcenet, each of them with a mess of mustard, next to whom came here yet carried ye boar's head crossed with a green silk scarf. As ye entered ye hall, he sang this Christmas carol, ye 3 last verses of every staff being repeated after him by a whole company. The boar is dead, lo, here is his head. As he did with everything else to do with Oxford, the Restoration antiquarian Anthony R. Wood got his hands on the story, noting in 1660 its antiquity and specific association with one Oxford college in particular. It must be remembered that at Queen's College, Oxon, is every year a boar's head provided by the Manciple against Christmas Day. This boar's head, being boiled or roasted, is laid in a great charger covered with a garland of bays or laurel, as broad at bottom as the brims of the charger. When the first course is served up in the refectory on I'm sorry, my voice is terrible. On Christmas Day in the said college, the Manciple brings the said boar's head from the kitchen up to the high table, accompanied with one of the taberders, who lays his hands on the charger. The taberder sings the aforesaid song, and when they come to the chorus, all the members that are in the refectory join together and sing it. This is an ancient custom, as old as 'tis thought as the college itself, but no reason to be given for it. Wood's text of the carol has gained the Latin line in reginensi atrio, in the Royal Hall or in the Hall of Queen's College. I haven't got a cold. I haven't got a cold at all, it's just my voice gets weaker after a while. Apologies. The reason to be given for the link with Queen's College lies in an ancient story which surfaced in print in the 19th century. It concerns a young scholar of Queen's named John Copcott. Copcott was making his way through Shotover Forest to the east of the city on his way to Mass in Horsepath Church on Christmas Day 1376, amusing himself by reading Aristotle as he went, as undergraduates do, when suddenly he was confronted by a wild boar. Scholar and beast eyed each other. Then, according to an account printed in 1876, as quick as speech, the taberder thrust the volume, vellum, brass and all, into the animal's throat and then finished the business with the spear, whilst his opponent was digesting his classics. An 1823 account gives the touching climax to the story. "Swallow that if you can," cried the unarmed student, thrusting his Aristotle down the boar's throat. "Graecum est," cried the boar, and expired, foaming at the mouth, for he found Aristotle, as many other throats had done and will do, too hard for him. Horsepath, where incidentally the lordship of the manor was once held by William Byrd, has a window in its church commemorating Copcott and his quick-thinking escape. And so the story, its carol and the ceremony march on through the centuries. Sometimes the boar's head is replaced with a wooden effigy with a small dish of pitch burning under its nose, perhaps to represent the poor old boar foaming at the mouth. One 18th century witness has the carol sung not to its stirring traditional tune, but to psalm chants, which sounds a very dull way to do it. Like the Holly and Ivy carols, there are many versions around the basic theme. Between them, however, Winkin, Hill, Wood, and other early sources give us a more than usually authoritative early text. It is certainly our first printed carol, at least as far as the words are concerned, and indeed the first appearance in print of the phrase Christmas carols, attached to a seasonal poem for singing. The tradition continues not just at its home in Oxford, but in Cambridge. several English schools, and perhaps surprisingly on American campuses. It's a good thing that it does. This song reminds us how much of our carol tradition is attached to older ideas of feasting and revelry as much as to Christian iconography. There's something else here too. We no longer have to hunt and kill our Christmas lunch, but the boar was a formidable foe. Huge, sharp-fanged and dangerous, best in him was a mark of valour and skill. Richard III honoured him with a place on his coat of arms. When we buy our turkey wrapped and gutted, we are at some very basic level celebrating the fact that we have tamed nature to our own inconvenience. It wasn't always like that. In the image of choristers carrying the head of a dead pig into supper, chanting ritually as they go, we are closer to the Lord of the Flies than to the Lord of the Dance. Something primitive survives in our Christmas carols, and that is the church window. A boar, my kingdom for a boar, Richard III's coat of arms at York Minster. And of course, tomorrow, the 28th, I'm going to read O Christmas Tree, The Holly and the Ivy, I Saw Three Ships, and of course the carol for the day, Personent Hodie, or Hodie as I should say. Or I might just do O Christmas Tree and the Holly and the Ivy. And then on the 29th do Saw Three Ships, Little Town of Bethlehem in Dulce Jubilo. 30, While Shepherds Watched, The Fleecy Care, Ding Dong Merrily on High, and Angels from the Realms of Glory. I've already done Hark the Herald. The 31st could be the Christ Child's Lullaby. Well, I'll do the Christ Child's Lullaby, and Here We Come a Wassailing on the 1st. On the 5th, I'll do the 12 Days of Christmas, and on the 6th, I'll do We Three Kings and What Child Is This? So, that's the plan for the future, God willing. And until then, may He bless you all. Amen.